Welcome to a special edition of America's Right to Vote. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns on the campaign trail in Nashville. This has been a presidential election unlike any other. Shaped by a global pandemic, an economy in a tailspin, and nationwide protests against systemic racism. And the act of voting has become a campaign issue in and of itself. One of the most important questions facing voters this time wasn't who are you voting for, but how are you going to cast your ballot? Events over the past year have put a spotlight on voting rights and access. We begin by taking a look at some of the roadblocks to voting and the people affected by them. In the lead up to November, you'll hear a lot of this.
Your vote matters.
Please vote.
Get off your butt. Get out and vote.
Just vote.
Vote.
Vote, vote, vote. The future is in your hands.
It seems like an easy course of action, but voting isn't easy for everyone. There are regulations in place that make it harder for some people to vote, and that's no accident.
The vote is the heart of American democracy. We all believe that passionately, but it's also been a big fight over the centuries about how we vote, who votes, and very often people trying to make it harder for other people to vote.
Waldman says barriers to voting are often subtle.
They can look kind of bureaucratic and complex, but in fact, they have the same kind of impact, unfair impact on Black voters and Latino voters of some of the laws from the past. Vote suppression is not just something from long ago newsreels. It happens today. It happens now.
Many of the key restrictions have come over the past decade and involve voter ID laws, cutting back on early voting, eliminating same-day registration, and redistricting.
We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting.
The former president said those words in a eulogy for John Lewis, whose activism led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That monumental law banned literacy tests and other discriminatory barriers to voting. It mandated that states and localities with a history of such discrimination seek federal approval to change their voting laws.
The American people heard our cries and responded to our pain and to our suffering.
But in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down that provision, arguing it was based on old data.
What that means practically is there is nothing that stops a state from passing a new law and evaluating first whether or not it's discriminatory, and any effort to stop it has to be after the fact. It's much easier for states to pass discriminatory voting laws.
One of those laws centers on voter ID. A majority of states request that voters present some form of identification in order to cast their ballot. And several key battleground states have strict enforcement measures.
There are people who say, why is it so hard to get an ID?
It's not just, you have to have ID, but it's also that you have to have certain kinds of IDs that Black and Latinx people are often less likely to have.
Experts say the pandemic threatens to make things worse. A shortage of poll workers in November could lead to fewer polling locations and longer lines.
Poll workers are dedicated, but many of them are senior citizens and are at health risk and aren't in a position to do it this year. The lines to vote, long lines, are found in Black communities and Latino communities and not in white communities. That's been documented over and over again.
While many states have expanded the option to vote by mail during the pandemic, several states require witness signatures or notaries. And most states require absentee ballots be returned by Election Day, so threats to Postal Service funding could suppress votes.
They want $25 billion for the post office because the post office is going to have to go to town to get these ridiculous ballots in.
Now we turn our focus to the voters themselves and how the American electorate is changing. Young voters, people of color, and unmarried women make up a majority of voters. But they're not turning out in the numbers that they could. Why? We found it's a mix of apathy and access.
A lot of us have this kind of like woke mentality where we're paying a lot more attention to the issues around us.
Voters like Dante Phillips are among the most coveted this election cycle.
If you really want young people to vote, you're going to have to talk about things that they're interested in.
A recent college graduate, Phillips is part of what's called the Rising American Electorate, made up of young voters, people of color, and unmarried women. Combined, these three groups account for over half of the people who voted in 2016. And in 2020, turnout among this group could be even higher if campaigns effectively engage them.
With the incredible energy and commitment to our democracy coming out of the George Floyd protests, we're seeing increased interest in voting and increased interest in learning how to participate in our democracy.
Tom Lopatch is the CEO of the nonpartisan Voter Participation Center, an organization helping to register and mobilize this group of voters during a pandemic.
We are living in a moment more than ever where Americans are seeing the direct connection between their lives, their challenges, their opportunities, and how government serves them.
But that doesn't mean they are willing to just hand over their vote.
I honestly think that 50 and under in the African-American realm are starting to realize that we don't have to be devoted to a party, that we need parties to be devoted to us.
Corey Prince is a community organizer in the key battleground of Wisconsin and has a message for both political parties.
The voters feel disengaged. They feel unheard. They feel that the issues that are important to them are not on the mouths of the politicians who are trying to be elected or want to be representing the people.
You're not seeing that ground level, person-to-person engagement that you're describing. You're not seeing that.
Not at all. Not at all.
While turnout among young voters and Asian Americans increased slightly in 2016, turnout among African Americans dropped. And overall, nearly 7% of eligible voters in the Rising American Electorate didn't vote 4 years ago.
Do you think that there will be people who say, why should I vote? What difference is it going to make?
There's like an idea that people are apathetic about this election. And I reject that apathy. And the only reason that I do is because I don't think it's apathy. I think the problem is access.
Victoria Sandoval is a 24-year-old living in Texas, a state with one of the largest shares of the Rising American Electorate. One barrier to voting is registration. This group is transient, moving between election cycles and less likely to own a home. They're also more likely to live below the poverty line.
I understand not wanting to engage with the system, but I also think that if every single person who is an eligible voter who feels that way did engage with the system and did vote, our country would look so different.
The pandemic and racial injustice are the major issues that cut across these groups and have become a rallying cry to get engaged in the process.
It is time for us to change our ways of performative action and to make actual change.
Enthusiasm is one thing, converting it into voting is another.
I'm not worried about people not turning out. I'm worried about how accessible this election is going to end up being for people who need to vote, whose voices need to be heard.
I feel like people are aware of the size of the demographic, but I'm not sure if they're aware of the impact, depending on how this election plays out. I'm sure people will become more aware of just like how influential our demographic is.
Nearly 6 million Americans won't be able to cast a ballot this year because of state felony disenfranchisement laws. That's according to the ACLU. We take a closer look at the fight underway in two key battleground states to restore voting rights for those who have served their prison sentences.
I ran through the parking lot. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote.
On November 3rd, Tasha Williams will cast a ballot for the first time in her life.
I'm going to let everybody, hey, y'all, this is my first time voting. It's going to be, look, a sense of excitement.
She's one of about 36,000 people in Louisiana to benefit from a recent state law restoring voting rights for those previously incarcerated. Williams served time for a nonviolent drug offense. She says not having that right to vote felt like being locked up all over again.
It made you question yourself, and it made me kind of angry. I just did 3 years in jail. You know, I thought I was finished with prison.
I just feel like it's kind of like double jeopardy.
After serving 2 years in prison for grand theft, Christine Vincent also saw voting as a chance to put her past behind her. But in her home state of Florida, that isn't so easy.
I didn't know that you couldn't vote when owing fines.
In 2018, Florida voters passed a constitutional amendment giving former felons the right to vote, with exceptions for murder and sexual offenses. But the governor signed a law requiring them to first pay off all court fees and fines. And this month, a federal appeals court upheld that law. Vincent has to pay back at least $8,000 in order to vote, which she's doing with the help of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition.
When you're going to go and cast your ballot in November, how do you think you're going to feel when you're able to do that, if you're able to do that?
Oh, I'm gonna feel like I'm not a criminal. I'm gonna be standing in line with a bunch of voters. To me, it's like I'm one of them almost. Like I just joined the good side instead of being on the bad side for so long.
The restoration of voting rights on paying back money, that's analogous to a property tax or property qualification.
Daryl Atkinson is a civil rights attorney and co-director of Forward Justice in North Carolina. A court ruling there expanded voting rights for the formerly incarcerated.
I can vote in North Carolina, but if I would ever move back to the place of my birth, I can't vote in the state of Alabama because I still owe them money. I still owe them money on a fine that was attendant to my 1996 conviction, a $50,000 fine that I've been paying since 2004 when it was brought to my attention. I thought I paid enough with my body through incarceration.
Currently, 8 states require action beyond the completion of a prison sentence in order to vote, such as wait times, intervention by the governor, or paying off fines.
It's an absolute barrier for a lot of people.
Jimmy Fasig is an attorney in Florida. In 1995, he was convicted of drug trafficking while in law school. He had the means to hire a lawyer to successfully petition the governor to restore his civil rights.
The system should be about rehabilitating people that have committed crimes so that they can eventually become productive members of society.
Right. So part of that reentrance into society is the ability to cast a ballot.
Yes, it's exactly right. The ability to cast a ballot, but it's more than that. It's the ability to have a voice.
That sentiment has started to transcend partisanship. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, a Republican, signed an executive order giving voting rights to convicted felons who completed their prison sentences.
Is there any partisan benefit to this?
Formerly incarcerated white male in Tallahassee might vote for Trump. And you know what? That's perfectly fine for me. Because it isn't about, we aren't doing this for Democrats or Republicans. We're doing this for our people because our people deserve to have a voice.
What does the right to vote mean for people who have been incarcerated?
It means everything. It means I'm a citizen. It means I'm a part of the fabric of this country. It means I get to participate.
Coming up, we'll take a closer look at the challenges facing Generation Z when it comes to the ballot box. And if you're wondering what you need to know about voting in your state, check out cbsnews.com/vote for a complete state-by-state breakdown. Welcome back. The pandemic has uprooted the lives of college students across the country, and now they face an additional challenge: how and where to vote. Registration deadlines and absentee ballot rules that vary state to state are just some of the complicating factors facing students who haven't returned to campus this semester.
This campus would be at least 3 times busier, and there would be events on like every corner of the campus. There's nothing going on here now, it's just classes.
College quads, like this one in the key battleground of Ohio, would ordinarily be fertile ground for get out the vote efforts. But as the coronavirus pandemic keeps students away from their campuses, it could also keep them away from their voting locations.
College students have a legal right to vote either near campus or back at their parents' address. But in order to vote near campus, they have to somehow prove that they're enrolled, that they're living nearby.
Nancy Thomas is the director of the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education at Tufts University, whose research shows that students registered away from campus turn out at lower rates. And this year, there is uncertainty about where students will be on Election Day.
You have to remember that voting is an act of togetherness. It's a very social act. Students vote because their friends vote.
Registration among 18 to 24-year-olds is up from the last election in key states like Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, but it's down in others like Ohio and Pennsylvania. And registration among 18 to 19-year-olds nationally is below 2016 levels.
College as a population is going to be more informed than the general populace. Barriers are going to be probably voter registration. Young people generally don't know what they need to do until they're told they didn't do it.
But that doesn't mean they are apathetic about voting.
Show of hands, how many of you are voting in the November election? Everybody. What do you think people underestimate or don't know enough about your generation?
I don't think they expect us to come out and vote, but I think that given the coronavirus, us being in quarantine and seeing how everything panned out, there was a lot more attention on our officials. Just being more informed, people are going to be more comfortable to go out and vote.
I think what we need now is just to empower this generation, Generation Z, to let them know that their vote counts, that their voices are important.
Generation Z now makes up for 10% of eligible voters, and many of them will be casting ballots in their first presidential election.
I think it's kind of exciting as someone who grew up with all my parents, and I have 3 older siblings who have all voted already.
I definitely feel like we're more able to speak up about issues that have been talked about, but there's really been no change in the past. So I think we're very motivated to see that change.
What should we know about this group?
We should know that they're activists. We should know that they want to talk issues. This generation is extremely diverse. The vote share of white students on college campuses is getting lower, and the vote share of students of color is getting higher.
They are also on track to be the most educated generation and are unafraid to speak their minds.
Donald Trump. Yes, Trump 2020. I like his policies. The past 4 years, he's done a great job.
Currently, I am supporting Donald Trump. My top issues are immigration and the economy. I'm in college, so I need to be getting a job here in the next few years.
Anybody voting for Biden? How much of that is a vote for Joe Biden and how much of it is a vote against the current president, Donald Trump?
Majority of it would be a vote against Trump, just because I don't like who he represents. But I also see a better future or more hope with Joe Biden.
We need a leader who believes in the dignity of all people and the right of all people to participate in the country and the world that we want to create.
Are you concerned that maybe some of your friends or fellow classmates may not vote in this election?
I am concerned. I think there's been some very targeted campaigns at young people, whether it's through weird Facebook ads or even just news stories that kind of highlight young people and cast them in this light as if we don't care about the things that matter. And I know that my peers do. I'm also hopeful that people are going to understand how important this election is.
The pandemic has strained resources for states conducting elections, and officials are trying to figure out how to give people more options to vote. It's not an easy task, but one unlikely state is offering a blueprint. When you hear the words Florida and election, you probably think of this.
Well, I got to tell you folks, A, I don't know. B, I don't know anybody who does know. What we do know is this. Florida is the state.
As everyone knows in America, this race has come down to the state of Florida.
I move that this board conduct a manual recount of all the ballots.
And on we go. This isn't going to be settled for a long, long while.
20 years later, with the pandemic shining a bright light on ballots, Florida is aiming to shed its problem child image when it comes to elections. How are you feeling?
Brimming with confidence.
And why is that?
Because things are going well.
And what's going well in your view?
Voters are voting, the post office is delivering them, and we're tabulating.
A reason for that show of confidence? Absentee voting by mail is common here, and unlike in other key battleground states, Florida can start processing ballots weeks before Election Day. This facility in Broward County is already processing around 10,000 per day. And do you think we'll know the results of the election here in Broward County on Election Day?
Yes.
Broward County, the second largest in the state, came under scrutiny in the 2018 midterms.
All right, so to Florida now, where unprecedented recounts are underway in 2 major midterm races.
A state audit found an understaffed office, a backlog of mail-in ballots, and a faulty ballot design. The supervisor of elections resigned. To avoid those mistakes, the supervisor's office here doubled the staff needed to count absentee ballots, upgraded the server to handle early volume, and trained over 4,000 people on election equipment and operations. New in Florida this year, these secure drop boxes. There are 24 here in Broward County. You simply drive up, drop off your ballot, and you can still get your voting sticker. Can you walk us through what happens once you return your ballot here?
We collect from these drop boxes here every couple of hours, and we bring them inside the building. We take a picture of the envelopes to preserve the signature for verification. We verify the signatures, bring them in to be taken out because the envelopes have to be separated from the privacy sleeves and the ballot. And then ultimately they're tabulated. They're run through an auditing system after they're tabulated.
Over 2 million Florida voters have returned their ballots so far, including more than 175,000 here in Broward County, with many voting absentee for the first time.
I just wanted to avoid the crowds and make sure that my vote was counted.
So it was a pretty easy process for you?
Very easy.
Would you vote this way again in the future?
Definitely. We wanted to do drop box. We didn't want to mail it. We want to make sure that our vote is counted. So in a week, we're going to call the elections and make sure that they have our vote.
And have you voted this way before?
No.
In absentee voting?
No. I always like to go in person, and put it in the thing and, made me feel good. I knew they got my vote instantly. But this time I'm doing it different. This is a very important election. It's probably the most important election in our lifetime. I'm very concerned for my children and grandchildren's future. That's why I'm here.
Some of the most important figures in the 2020 campaign aren't the candidates. They're election officials. We spoke with secretaries of state in 2 key battlegrounds, Republican Brad Raffensperger in Georgia and Democrat Jocelyn Benson in Michigan. There has been a lot of heated rhetoric around voting this year, but these officials are pushing a similar message: confidence in our elections. We talked to both of them about how to make sure your ballot counts. There's a lot of concern about ballot rejections, how to make sure your ballot counts, how it gets to where it needs to go, and how it is verified and can be counted. What should people know? What should people be aware of to make sure that their ballot counts?
Well, if you're voting absentee, we also stood up a system called Ballot Tracks, and you can set that app onto your phone, and you can actually track your absentee ballot, through the process, and then you can see if it's been accepted. You also can go to the Secretary of State's website, sos.ga.gov, and you can track and see if your absentee ballot has been tracked. When you show up to vote in person, for the first time, we have a verifiable paper ballot. And so it will scan, and if it doesn't scan, it'll kick out right at that moment. But if it's been scanned, then it will be tabulated after the precincts close. So that is really giving people that confidence. And for the first time ever, we're going to be doing a statewide audit of the races. We're standing that up in 1 year, actually less than 1 year. And so that's amazing because most states have taken 5 to 7 years to do a statewide audit. And that's really going to give voters that confidence. If it was a 51-49 race, that when we do the audit, we can verify what it was. Was it a 51-49? And we continue to make sure we follow that audit process through. And that'll give you the confidence. I like to tell people, you may not like the results, but you can have confidence that the results were actually correctly determined. And that's really important for voters, to have that confidence.
There's been a lot of rhetoric around this election and how to cast your vote. The president has called this election rigged. Is it going to be rigged here in Georgia?
Well, in Georgia, we have the appropriate guardrails to make sure that we can secure the vote. We know who those voters are. We have voter identification. We really feel comfortable about the results. You'll have confidence in Georgia that we got the process right. Like I said, you may not like the results if you're voting for this person or that person, but you can have confidence in the results. And that's what our job is the process.
Early voting has already been underway here in Georgia, but what is keeping you up at night these days?
Well, my goal is we started off really great. You know, the first 5 minutes of the first quarter was maybe a little rough, but then the first quarter was this last week. We had record turnouts. We have about 800,000 people have already voted. If I project that out, we're going to be at 2.5 million. Our goal was 2. This is a good thing because we hit 2.5 here, 1.5 absentee. That means that maybe we'll have a relatively easy day of just 2 million folks showing up for that 12-hour period of Tuesday, November 3rd, and that'll be a great day.
So your goal is to have as many people that can vote early as possible
Exactly.
to kind of alleviate.
We're telling everyone, vote absentee, vote early.
Okay, so you're saying you're encouraging absentee voting.
Oh, absolutely. Absentee, early, both are great, and make sure you get your votes in. It really makes it easier on you as the voter. Because we're going to have big lines and big turnout on Tuesday, November 3rd. That's what happens when you're voting in a pandemic. When you space voters out, people will be wearing masks. It just takes a little bit longer. And so we understand that you don't get the same throughput.
I want to talk about mail-in voting, absentee voting. You don't need an excuse here in Michigan to vote absentee. How many people are you expecting to vote by mail this time?
We're on track to have 3 million of our just over 5 million voters that we're expecting this year vote from home or vote absentee. Already in October, 2.5 million citizens have said we want to vote from home, send me my ballot. And noting that, now in Michigan you have to affirmatively request your ballot before you receive it, and so those requests have been coming in really since the spring. It is a record-breaking number. It breaks our previous record, which was in August of this year, of 1.6 million voters. And what that also means is that we've got a lot more ballots that we're counting centrally and securely on Election Day, as opposed to being voted in person at the precincts. And so you'll see some adjustments, some delays in when we're able to report our totals, just because the change in how ballots are being voted and tabulated this year. But because of that, we're going to work to make sure the system is transparent and secure, and that voters, whether they're voting in person or by mail, can have certainty that their ballot is being counted.
So if we don't know the results of the election on Election Day here in Michigan, a key battleground that everybody will be watching on election night, should we be concerned?
No, it's actually a reflection of the system working. Because look, if we've got 3 million people or more voting by mail and sending their ballots in, those ballots can't even begin to be counted until 7 a.m. on Election Day here in Michigan. So it's simply just not feasible to process and tabulate 3 million or more ballots in 12 hours on Election Day. Instead, we're going to prioritize security and accuracy and be very careful with how we manage the process to ensure that every ballot is counted and secured. Now, we've also doubled the number of ballot tabulators and significantly increased the number of people who will be staffing and tabulating these ballots. So we anticipate that we'll be able to have a much more efficient process than ever before, but it still is going to take a few days for us to tabulate those millions of ballots.
This date, November 3rd, has probably been circled and highlighted on your calendar, and the days after, I'm sure, as well. What is keeping you up at night heading into this election?
Well, other than my 4-year-old, who loves keeping me up at night, certainly the misinformation that we're seeing come into our state. I mean, we have worked so hard, myself and the 1,500 clerks all across our state, for the past year and a half to prepare for November. And we're ready. We've increased our election security in every way possible. What I'm worried about are the bad actors, both foreign and domestic, who seek to undermine citizens' faith in the process, with a goal of either deterring them from voting at all, or causing them to doubt that their vote will be counted or that the results of our elections are an accurate reflection of the will of the people. I know with certainty that we will have record turnout this fall, and that the results of our elections will be accurate. However, I'm deeply concerned about efforts to further partisan goals or political agendas, undermine that truth to so many of our citizens, and finding ways to adapt and react to the near daily efforts to misinform our voters about their rights is truly what keeps me up at night, because every day brings new and emerging ways in which people are trying to confuse our voters about their rights.
And Secretary Benson says they're aiming to have all ballots counted by Friday, November 6th. We're just 10 days away from Election Day, but over 40 million Americans have already cast their ballots this year. That's a record number. We'll be covering it all from now until Election Day and beyond here on CBSN. Thank you for joining us. I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns on the campaign trail. We'll see you again soon. If you're wondering what you need to know about voting in your state, check out cbsnews.com/vote for a complete state-by-state breakdown.